On the morning of September 16, 1994, at the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, over 60 students reported seeing an unidentified flying object and encountering mysterious beings during their break. This incident is often referred to as the Ruwa UFO incident. The witnesses, primarily children between the ages of 6 and 12, stated that they saw a silver disc-shaped object hovering and landing in a field adjacent to their school. The object was shiny and reflective, almost glowing. Following its landing, the children reported seeing one or more beings emerge from the craft. These beings had large eyes, disproportionately large heads, and wore tight-fitting black suits. The children said that their eyes were almost like their way of communicating. Several children reported that the beings conveyed urgent messages about environmental conservation and humanity's future. The beings, according to the children, emphasized the need to protect the earth and warned against the dangers of pollution and environmental degradation. Dr. John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist who later interviewed the children, found these accounts of telepathic messages both fascinating and concerning. Cynthia Hind, a UFO researcher in Africa, was the first to investigate the incident. Arriving shortly after the event, she interviewed the children and collected drawings they made of the UFO and the beings. She believed that the children's rural upbringing meant they had little exposure to media portrayals of UFOs, lending credibility to their accounts. Dr. John Mack arrived in Zimbabwe soon after Hind. He conducted thorough interviews with the children, often in small groups, to ensure the authenticity of their stories. Mack, known for his research into alien abductions, faced significant professional scrutiny for his beliefs, but remained convinced that the children were speaking the truth. Skeptics suggest that the incident might have been a case of mass hysteria, influenced by extensive media coverage. 2 days before the sighting, a bright fireball from the re-entry of the Zenit 2 rocket was visible over southern Africa. This event, widely reported in the media, could have led to children to see any unusual occurrence as a UFO sighting. In November 1985, a hunter discovered a 55-gallon barrel in Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside were the remains of an adult woman and a young girl. Both had been beaten to death, and the bodies were in advanced stages of decomposition. This made identification extremely difficult. This discovery kicked off a decades-long investigation that went on to become one of the state's most notorious cases. The bodies were wrapped in plastic, and their state of decomposition suggested they had been there for a while. Despite the advanced state of decay, forensic experts were able to determine that the woman and the girl had suffered blunt force trauma to their heads, which was the likely cause of death. Initial attempts to identify the victims through missing persons reports and local inquiries proved fruitless, leaving investigators at a dead end. The case was handled by local police, who were soon joined by state investigators and the FBI. Investigators conducted extensive searches of the surrounding area, hoping to find additional clues that could help identify the victims or the killer. Despite these efforts, no further evidence was immediately found, and the case began to grow cold. Investigators collected what evidence they could, including hair and fiber samples, but these did not yield any significant leads. Composite sketches of the victims were created and spread around in hopes that someone might recognize them, but no credible leads emerged. 15 years later, in May 2000, another barrel was found near the same location. This barrel contained the remains of 2 young girls. Like the previous victims, these remains were also severely decomposed. It was determined that these victims had likely been killed around the same time as those found in 1985. The similarities in the condition and placement of the bodies suggested a connection between the 2 discoveries, but the identities of the victims and the perpetrator remained unknown. The second discovery reignited interest in the case. A local detective conducting a training exercise noticed the second barrel and its contents, which closely mirrored the first one. The remains were similarly wrapped in plastic and showed signs of blunt force trauma. This discovery prompted a renewed investigation, with authorities theorizing that the same perpetrator was responsible for both barrels. Investigators reviewed all cases of missing persons from the time period, but were still unable to match the victims to any reported cases. Again, due to the decomposition, the victims were nearly impossible to identify. Dental records and fingerprints were not usable, and the victims' faces were far too damaged. By the early to mid-2000s, advancements in DNA technology allowed forensic experts to re-examine the remains of the victims discovered in Bear Brook State Park. Re-examination revealed that the woman and two of the girls found in the second barrel were maternally related, indicating they were likely a mother and her children. However, the second child from the first discovery was not related to them. In 2017, genetic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter was enlisted to assist with the case. Using DNA samples from the victims, Ray Venter was able to construct family trees that eventually led to the identification of the adult woman and the two related children. The adult woman was identified as Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, born in 1954. The two girls were her daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, born in 1971, and Sarah Lynn McWaters, born in 1977. Honeychurch and her daughters had last been seen in California in 1978, shortly after she began dating a man named Terry Rasmussen. This identification provided crucial context and helped to piece together their final days. Further investigation revealed that Terry had led a life of crime. He went by multiple aliases through his criminal career, and investigators believe that Terry was likely the killer. Additionally, Terry had been responsible for other murders in the past as well. He had used the alias Bob Evans while living in New Hampshire and was last seen with Honeychurch and her daughters around Thanksgiving in 1978. His known aliases included Curtis Mayo Kimball, Gordon Jensen, and Lawrence Vanner. His ability to assume new identities and integrate into different communities earned him the moniker the Chameleon Killer. DNA testing confirmed that he was the biological father of the unidentified girl found in the second barrel, linking him directly to the crime. Further investigation into his background revealed a pattern of violence and deception that spanned several states and decades. However, despite the fourth victim being related to Terry, her identity is still unknown. It is also unclear who this girl's mother is. This victim was not related to Honeychurch and her daughters. Investigators continue to seek information about her and her mother's identity, hoping to finally shut the door on this case. Charles Rogers was regarded as a rather mysterious man. Born in 1921, Rogers grew up in Houston, Texas, where he lived with his elderly parents, Fred and Edwina Rogers, at their home on Driscoll Street. Despite a seemingly normal upbringing, Charles wasn't exactly normal himself. He was highly intelligent, having obtained a degree in nuclear physics. After college, he went on to serve in World War II, where he learned to fly planes. This particular detail would later fuel a number of theories regarding his disappearance. After the war, Rogers worked as a seismologist for Shell Oil Company for nearly a decade. His co-workers and supervisors stated that Rogers was incredibly smart and intuitive, but he was also reclusive. Neighbors and even relatives noted that Rogers maintained minimal contact with his parents despite living under the same roof. Communication with his parents was so limited that he reportedly communicated with them primarily through notes slipped under his bedroom door. This detail made Charles a rather peculiar individual. On June 23, 1965, Houston police were called to the Rogers residence for a welfare check after Edwina's nephew, Marvin Martin, expressed concern over not hearing from his aunt for several days. Upon arrival, police officers Charles Bullock and L.M. Barta found the house eerily silent and somewhat barricaded with flower pots. Suspicious, they forced their way into the house and headed toward the kitchen, where they made a discovery they would never forget. In the refrigerator, they found what initially appeared to be neatly stacked hog meat. However, after closer inspection, the officers realized this was not hog meat. Instead, these were the dismembered bodies of Fred and Edwina Rogers. Fred had been bludgeoned with a hammer, while Edwina had been shot. The dismemberment was described as meticulous, with organs removed and flushed down the toilet. The couple's heads were also located in the drawers of the fridge, but many other parts were never found. Investigators quickly shifted their focus toward Charles Rogers. Given his reclusive nature and the fact that he was nowhere to be found, he became the prime suspect almost immediately. The discovery of blood in his room and a blood-stained saw added to the mounting evidence against him. Investigators launched a nationwide manhunt, searching airports and other possible escape routes, but Rogers had vanished without a trace. This disappearance led to rampant speculation and various theories regarding his whereabouts and involvement in the murders. One of the primary theories about Charles Rogers centers on his mental health and the tumultuous relationship he had with his parents. Neighbors and relatives describe the Rogers household as dysfunctional, with deep-seated conflicts that might have driven Charles to a breaking point. Fred Rogers and Edwina Rogers were said to be manipulative and controlling. There are claims that Fred was abusive towards Charles, both emotionally and physically, which may have continued into his adulthood. Edwina was also implicated in financially exploitative behaviors, such as taking out loans in Charles's name without his consent. This manipulation extended to the point where Fred and Edwina allegedly siphoned off Charles's savings, adding financial strain to the emotional burden he carried. Charles's reclusive nature might have been a coping mechanism for dealing with his parents' behavior. Living in the same house, yet communicating through notes slipped under doors, indicates a severe level of isolation. Some psychologists believe that such an extreme situation and continuous psychological pressure could contribute to severe mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and possibly worse conditions like schizophrenia or delusional disorder. The theory suggests that the cumulative stress from a long-term toxic relationship with his parents could have led Charles to a mental breakdown. This breakdown, combined with any underlying mental health issues, might have driven him to take his parents' lives in an act of desperation and release from years of suffering. Due to the circumstances of the crime, it is believed that Charles may have been having this idea in his head for quite some time. Despite exhaustive searches and investigations, Charles Rogers was never found, leading to widespread speculation that he successfully escaped and started a new life under a different identity. Forensic accountants Hugh and Martha Gardenier proposed that Rogers fled to Mexico and later to Honduras, where he found work in the mining industry. The Gardeniers suggest that Rogers' expertise in geology and seismology, along with his connections in the oil and mining industries, enabled him to secure employment in remote locations. This would have provided him with the means to stay hidden and live off the grid. According to their research, Rogers was eventually killed in Honduras over a wage dispute with miners. His military training and survival skills would have made it plausible for him to evade capture and navigate a new life in unfamiliar territories. Additionally, the clean escape and the lack of a trail suggest a high level of planning, a trait consistent with Rogers' background and alleged intelligence connections. In 1975, 10 years after the murders, a Houston judge declared Charles Rogers legally dead. Despite this legal closure, the case remains unsolved and Rogers is still officially the prime suspect. Over the years, the case has continued to attract interest from both the public and law enforcement, with occasional new investigations and theories emerging, but no definitive evidence has ever surfaced to conclusively solve the murders or determine Rogers' fate. There is even one theory that suggests Charles was a part of the CIA. Ciudad Juarez is infamous for its high rates of violence against women, particularly femicides. The city's industrial boom attracted a large influx of female workers from poorer regions. These women, who often worked in grueling conditions with long hours and low pay, became frequent targets of violence. Many were raped, abducted, and murdered while commuting to and from their jobs, especially during early morning or late night shifts. At its peak, about 80% of the assembly line workers were women, but this number has since declined. In response to this violence, Diana, the hunter of bus drivers, emerged in August 2013 as a vigilante. This individual, described by witnesses as a middle-aged woman with a dark complexion and blonde hair, targeted bus drivers who were believed to be responsible for the assaults against female passengers. On consecutive days, she boarded buses and shot 2 drivers on a route heavily used by female factory workers. After the murders of 2 bus drivers in Ciudad Juarez, local news outlets received an email from an individual claiming to be Diana. In this email, Diana described herself as a former victim of violence committed by bus drivers. She explained that her actions were acts of revenge, not just for her own suffering, but on behalf of many women who had endured similar violence. The email criticized the authorities for their persistent inaction and failure to protect women from such events. The murders instilled fear among bus drivers, leading many to avoid work in the following days. The police response involved launching an investigation, which included placing undercover officers on buses and revisiting recent assault cases involving bus drivers. Despite these efforts, Diana was never apprehended and her true identity remains unknown. Mona Elizabeth Blades, born in 1957, was an 18-year-old woman living in Hamilton, New Zealand. She was known for being a responsible and agreeable teenager. On the morning of May 31st, 1975, Mona planned to hitchhike from Hamilton to Hastings. She intended to attend her nephew's first birthday. However, Mona never made it to the party. Instead, she vanished. On the day Mona disappeared, she was wearing light green slacks, a green rugby jersey with a white collar, a black duffel coat, and brown shoes with yellow laces. She also carried a brown bag and an old brown suitcase. Mona set out on her journey early in the morning since the distance that needed to be traveled was quite long. She was last seen on Matea Road, getting into an orange Datsun 120Y station wagon driven by an unknown man. The sighting was confirmed by multiple witnesses, including a truck driver who investigators relied on in the early stages of the investigation. As it was a long weekend, traffic on the roads was expected to be higher than usual. The route Mona chose was a common one for travelers between Hamilton and Hastings, and hitchhiking was not uncommon at the time. That truck driver I mentioned reported seeing Mona accepting the ride from a man around 10:30 a.m. He described the driver as a man in his mid to late 30s with a medium build and dark hair. Further reports came from other witnesses who saw the orange Datsun veering off the highway and stopping on rural Matea Road. The detailed description of the vehicle was widely publicized in the media, and the police shifted their focus to locating vehicles across the country that fit the description. The New Zealand police immediately launched one of the largest search operations in the country's history. The search effort was vast, involving over 500 officers from various regions, including Taupo, Rotorua, Hamilton, and Auckland. These officers combed through approximately 200 kilometers of highway stretching from Tokoroa to Napier. The search involved not only police officers but also volunteers from the local communities who scoured the rugged terrain and dense forests along the highway. Despite the efforts, the search teams found no physical evidence or traces of Mona, her belongings, or the vehicle. The search for vehicles fitting the description also proved fruitless. Authorities obtained over 500 potential suspects, all of which were eliminated from the list. Nevertheless, investigators believed this was their best lead, which some have suggested caused officials to overlook other potential leads. The lack of physical evidence made it extremely tough to progress the case. Investigators pretty much only had eyewitness accounts to work with, and while those can be valuable, they can also be unreliable since people naturally can incorrectly recall information. One of the earliest and most notable suspects in the case was John Freeman. Freeman came under police scrutiny because he had rented an orange Datsun during the weekend of Blades' disappearance. Later on, the suspicion surrounding Freeman grew. Shortly after the police publicly announced their interest in locating an orange Datsun, Freeman was involved in a violent incident. He shot and wounded a student at St. Cuthbert's College in Auckland and then took his own life. Despite these alarming events, there was no concrete evidence directly linking Freeman to Blades' disappearance. Another individual who became a person of interest was Charlie Hughes, a man from Hamilton who later relocated to Australia. Hughes was identified based on circumstantial evidence and remained on police radar for quite a while. He has publicly expressed frustration about being listed as a suspect, consistently denying any involvement in the case. Hughes even went on record in newspapers and on television to assert his innocence. Charlie Hughes has also never been officially tied to Mona's disappearance. In 2003, a new lead surfaced when a report emerged claiming that Mona Blades' name was found etched on a concrete garage floor in Huntly. This discovery prompted renewed investigations as it was feared that the name might mark a grave site. However, this lead turned out to be a dead end. The name had been inscribed as a prank 6 years earlier, and the former owner of the property apologized to Mona's family for the distress this caused. New theories began to emerge as time passed. One particular theory caught a lot of attention from the public. This theory suggested that Mona was somehow tied to gang activities. It was proposed that Mona might have had associations with biker gangs in Auckland and Hamilton. A documentary suggested that she could have encountered gang members while hitchhiking and they might have been involved in her disappearance. This theory posits that gang members traveling to a gathering in Wellington during the holiday weekend could have crossed paths with Mona. Witnesses had reported seeing gang members in the area at the time. Furthermore, the documentary revealed that Mona had some affiliations with bikers, which were not thoroughly looked into during the original investigation. This same documentary, titled Cold Case, also spoke about how the orange Datsun was given way too much attention, leaving a lot of other avenues unexplored. For example, it was reported that a red Toyota station wagon was seen traveling with a group of bikers on the day Mona went missing. It's possible that this red vehicle was somehow tied to Mona, but again, investigators were dead set on finding an orange Datsun. Police were also criticized for using an outdated photo of Mona with a different hairstyle. In the photo, Mona had long curly hair, but on the day she disappeared, it was said that she had a shorter mullet-style haircut. Mount Yamantau, towering at approximately 1,640 meters or 5,380 feet, is the highest peak in the southern Ural Mountains. Located in Bashkortostan, Russia, this mountain has gained international attention due to the alleged underground bunker complex constructed beneath it. This potential facility has spurred numerous theories and speculations over the years. Mount Yamantau also holds significant value to Russia's government. The Ural Mountains have historically served as a natural barrier and a line of defense, dividing the European and Asian parts of Russia. This region, particularly Bashkortostan, has been pivotal in Russia's military planning. The area is also said to be frequently used for secret government projects, but again, what people are most intrigued about is a supposed bunker under Mount Yamantau. This facility is believed to be one of the largest and most sophisticated of its kind, potentially spanning over 100 kilometers in length and reaching depths of 600 meters. The complex is thought to be equipped with a variety of advanced systems designed to ensure survival and remain operational in case of a nuclear war. Its command and control centers are said to be nuclear-proof. The depth and design of the complex are said to withstand direct nuclear strikes, ensuring that it can remain intact during a crisis. To support long-term habitation, the complex is rumored to include fully equipped hospitals, which, for obvious reasons, would be essential. They are likely to be equipped with advanced medical technology and supplies, ensuring complex healthcare for those who reside in it. A self-sustaining power plant as well as a heavily fortified defense system are believed to be part of the bunker's infrastructure. There would also need to be food production facilities and water purification systems in place. The existence of the bunker came to light primarily through US intelligence efforts during the 1990s. Satellite imagery revealed significant construction activities, including extensive tunneling and the movement of large quantities of construction materials. These observations, combined with reports from local sources, suggested that Russia was building a massive underground complex. The US government raised concerns about the purpose of the complex, suspecting it could serve as a command and control center for nuclear operations, a storage site for nuclear weapons, or a shelter for the Russian elite in the event of a global catastrophe. Despite repeated inquiries, Russian authorities provided limited and often conflicting explanations, ranging from mining operations to a simple command post. This lack of transparency only fueled further speculation and concern. Investigative journalists have continued to explore the mystery of Mount Yamantau, uncovering new details and reinforcing existing theories. Reports indicate that the bunker is part of a broader network of secret bunkers across Russia. These bunkers, allegedly stretching from Moscow to the Urals, include deep underground shelters and extensive tunnel systems, some reaching depths of up to 200 meters. Giant scuttles refer to large, elusive squid-like creatures in the ocean, and with most of these cryptid entries, I'm a bit skeptical, but when the creature is said to have been seen in the water, it's a different story. Giant scuttles are often compared to the Kraken, and some even say that giant scuttles are what sparked the Kraken legend in the first place. Giant scuttles are rumored to be roaming near the Bahamas and other Caribbean islands. A pearl diver once said that a giant octopus ran up to his boat, but after failing to get a good grip on it, it fled. Legends say that the giant scuttle is only a threat if it can wrap one of its tentacles around the boat, while simultaneously getting another one inside the vessel. In case you don't know, this iceberg is pretty old, so some of the cases on here have been solved. This next one about Kristin Smart is one such example, but nevertheless, I decided to include it anyway. 19-year-old Kristin Smart was described as vibrant and ambitious. She was a freshman at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, but vanished on May 25, 1996. Kristin studied architecture and was said to have a friendly nature. On the night of her disappearance, she attended an off-campus party, which was a typical thing. Unfortunately, this seemingly ordinary night ended in tragedy. Kristin was last seen around 2 a.m. walking back to her dormitory with fellow student Paul Flores. They were accompanied by 2 other students initially, but as the group neared the dormitories, Kristin and Paul were left alone. According to reports, Paul Flores offered to help Kristin back to her dorm because she was intoxicated and struggling to walk. This was the last time anyone saw Kristin alive. Kristin was reported missing to the campus police, but the initial reaction from law enforcement was lackluster. The police were slow to respond, treating the case as a typical college student who had gone off the radar for a few days. They did not immediately recognize the severity of the situation, which cost valuable time in the early stages of the investigation. It wasn't until days later that the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office took over the investigation. By then, crucial evidence and potential witnesses had become harder to track down. Law enforcement, volunteers, and Kristin's family conducted searches around the campus and surrounding areas. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and even ground-penetrating radars were used on the off chance that Kristin had actually died, but these efforts yielded no physical evidence. Paul Flores, the last person seen with Kristin, quickly became a prime suspect. His behavior following Kristin's disappearance raised immediate suspicions. Paul had a black eye when he was first interviewed by the police. Initially, he claimed he got the injury from playing basketball with friends, but this story was quickly disputed by those friends. He then changed his story, saying he had bumped his head while working on his car, further increasing the investigators' suspicions. Paul's inconsistent statements and suspicious behavior were not the only factors that made him a person of interest. In the days following Kristin's disappearance, several witnesses came forward with information that pointed toward him. Some reported seeing Paul acting strangely, while others mentioned hearing disturbing comments he made about Kristin. Despite these red flags, there was no direct evidence linking him to Kristin's disappearance at the time, making it difficult for authorities to press charges. The investigation into Kristin Smart's disappearance contained numerous procedural missteps that fueled public criticism. Additionally, the initial searches of Paul's dorm room and vehicle were not conducted thoroughly. By the time more rigorous searches were performed, any potential evidence that could have been found was likely compromised. Kristin's family was vocal about their dissatisfaction with how the case was handled. They pushed for more aggressive investigative tactics and greater public awareness. This pressure eventually led to more intensive search efforts and a renewed focus on Paul as a suspect. But again, Paul was eliminated from the list of suspects due to insufficient evidence. After years of fruitless searches and no substantial leads, the decision was made to declare Kristin legally dead in 2002. And despite officials removing Paul as a suspect, Kristin's family still believed he played a role in her disappearance. The declaration of death allowed Kristin's family to pursue a wrongful death lawsuit against Paul. Although the lawsuit did not immediately lead to new evidence or breakthroughs in the criminal investigation, it kept the case in the public eye and maintained pressure on law enforcement to continue their efforts. It wasn't until 2020 when a major development occurred. Law enforcement seized 2 trucks owned by Paul Flores. Further investigations and searches of properties linked to him yielded numerous interesting items, including forensic evidence. This evidence was able to be tied to Kristin's disappearance. The efforts of the investigators finally came together in another breakthrough in April 2021. On April 13th, 2021, Paul Flores was arrested at his home in San Pedro, California on suspicion of murder. His father, Ruben Flores, was also arrested at his residence in Arroyo Grande, charged as an accessory for allegedly helping to conceal Kristin's body. For over 2 decades, Paul was able to elude the law due to the lack of concrete evidence. During the searches leading up to the arrest, investigators found evidence that included soil disturbances and the presence of human blood under the deck of Ruben Flores' home. Although the blood was too degraded to extract a DNA profile, the findings strongly suggested that Kristin's remains had been at that location at some point. The trial began in July 2022. On October 18th, 2022, the jury found Paul Flores guilty of first-degree murder. The jury concluded that Paul had killed Kristin during an attempted in his dorm room. The same day, a separate jury acquitted Ruben Flores of accessory charges, determining that there was not enough evidence to convict him of helping to conceal Kristin's body. In March 2023, Paul was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Then in August of the same year, Paul was involved in a fight in prison where he was seriously injured. Dino Bravo, born Adolfo Bresciano on August 6, 1948 in Campobasso, Italy, emigrated to Canada with his family at a young age. Settling in Montreal, Quebec, Bresciano developed an early interest in professional wrestling. He began his wrestling career in 1970, adopting the ring name Dino Bravo. Early on, Bravo trained under Gino Brito, who would later become not just a mentor but a business partner. Bravo's wrestling career took off in the local circuits of Quebec, where he quickly gained a reputation for his strength and charisma. In the early 1970s, he teamed up with his trainer Gino Brito, and together they captured several regional tag team championships. In 1978, Bravo joined the World Wrestling Federation, aka the WWF. Bravo's career in the WWF was marked by several notable feuds and matches. He was known for his powerful build and strength, which he often showcased in bench press competitions and other feats of strength during his wrestling matches. Through the 1980s, Bravo continued to see success. However, as the 1980s drew to a close, Bravo's wrestling career began to wane. By the early 1990s, he found himself with a much smaller role in the WWF. His final appearance was at WrestleMania 7 in 1991. Bravo officially retired from professional wrestling in 1992. Post-retirement, Dino Bravo struggled immensely with money. The transition from a well-known wrestler to an ordinary life proved to be a tough transition for him. Bravo didn't really have any skills outside of wrestling, so he struggled to maintain his lifestyle and support his family. The financial strain was made worse by his lavish spending habits and the high expectations that came with his former wrestling fame. Bravo's marriage to Diane Revest, the niece of Montreal crime boss Vincenzo Cotroni, brought him into close contact with organized crime. The Cotroni family was deeply involved in various illegal activities, including loan sharking, substance trafficking, and the illicit cigarette trade. With no other options, Bravo went to the Cotronis for a job. By the early 1990s, Bravo became involved in the illegal cigarette smuggling business. This involved transporting cigarettes from areas with low taxation to those with higher taxes, circumventing government regulations, and creating significant profits. Many of the routes involved partnering with Native American tribes, and wrestling was beloved amongst many of the natives, which made Bravo a popular figure with them. These Native American groups really trusted Bravo, which gave him an opportunity to establish a monopoly in this industry. But as you would expect, other gangs who saw Bravo's increasing influence were not happy. On March 10, 1993, Dino Bravo was found dead in his home in Laval, Quebec. Bravo had been shot 11 times, with 7 of those wounds in his head. His wife Diane and their daughter were out at a ballet lesson when the event occurred. Upon returning home, Diane discovered Bravo's body slumped in a chair with the television still on. The investigation of the crime scene revealed no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to conclude that Bravo likely knew his assailants and had willingly let them into his home. This detail pointed towards a premeditated act, possibly involving individuals Bravo trusted or had business dealings with. The lack of forced entry also implied that the killers might have been watching the hockey game with Bravo before the murder. Furthermore, the remote control was found loosely in his hand, which suggested that he did not expect an attack. Officials also believed that this was a professional hit. The manner in which Bravo was killed was methodical, and the excessive number of bullets used suggested a message was being sent, possibly as a warning to others involved in similar activities. One of the primary theories surrounding Dino Bravo's murder is linked to his involvement in the illegal cigarette smuggling business. Again, because of Bravo's relationship with the Native Americans, he became quite powerful. However, this power came at a price. It is believed that Bravo had a dispute with a major dealer, which may have escalated into violence. According to reports, Bravo had a $400,000 shipment of coke that was seized by the police, causing friction between him and his criminal partners. This failed deal is thought to have played a crucial role in his death. Another theory points to internal conflicts within Montreal's organized crime families. Dino Bravo was connected to the Cotroni family through his marriage, but by the early 1990s, the Rizzuto family had become the dominant force in Montreal's underworld. The power struggle between these two factions could have implicated Bravo. The Cotroni family's decline and the Rizzuto family's rise might have made Bravo a target. The nature of the crime made it difficult for authorities to pin down the culprits. Moreover, the code of silence within organized crime circles meant that witnesses were either unwilling to come forward or simply didn't have information. Despite various theories and ongoing speculation, the exact motive and identity of Bravo's killers remain unknown. The case went cold due to the lack of physical evidence and the difficulty in penetrating the organized crime networks involved. There were rumors going around sometime in the 1990s about fake social workers abducting children. It is unclear how this story came to be, but it seems that similar events have occurred all around the world. One such event occurred in late February of 2018. In Queanbeyan, Australia, a mother of two reported a random encounter with a man and a woman. After contacting the police, they made the following statement to the public. The man and woman claimed to be FACS caseworkers and produced what appeared to be an identity card. They stated they were there to check on the welfare of the children. The mother stated the children were asleep and told the pair she could call them to return when they woke. However, the pair stated that they would wait. A short time later, the mother presented the children to the pair in the lounge room. After checking the children and their bedroom, the pair left the home. The woman became suspicious of the visit and contacted Queanbeyan FACS, who confirmed they had no record of the visit from any of their caseworkers, and the matter was reported to police. The man was white, somewhere in his 30s, slim, 6 feet tall, dark hair, and had a large nose. As for the woman, she was also white, in her 20s, 5 feet tall, medium build with curly hair. Both of them were wearing formal clothing. Ever since this encounter, there has not been another like it in that specific area. We can take a look at an incident from 1990 where a woman named Elizabeth Coupland was in a similar situation. Many like to point to this as the beginning of these fake social worker reports. Two individuals approached Coupland's residence in Sheffield, England. Filled with concern for her children's safety, Elizabeth let the two visitors into her home. They proceeded to inspect her kids, one of which was 2 years old and the other an infant of less than 6 months. Following their examination, the two visitors departed, leaving Elizabeth with lingering concern. But then just a few days later, one of the women reappeared, accompanied by a male partner. And they had some distressing news. They said that the children had to be removed from Elizabeth's home and placed into foster care. And immediately, this sent waves of fear, confusion, and anger through Elizabeth. She was skeptical to say the least. She threatened to involve the police, which caused the pair to flee the area. Curiously, the NSPCC denied any knowledge of these visits, asserting that none of their representatives had visited Elizabeth on that specified day. This infuriated Elizabeth even more. A group of people had just attempted to walk off with their kids by impersonating people of authority. Police treated the incident with gravity, conducting a thorough investigation that failed to uncover any evidence of misconduct by government officials. Nevertheless, this incident marked the onset of a series of similar encounters during that time. In that same year, Operation Childcare was launched in South Yorkshire. The claims from Elizabeth and others sparked the need for investigations into those who were pretending to be social workers. It aimed to tackle reports of child abductions and abuse supposedly done by social workers or folks pretending to be them. Detective Superintendent David Foss was the man leading the show. He had 23 different police departments and agencies all teaming up for this massive project. Foss later said the trickiest part was people falling for the media drama, swallowing allegations without any real proof. He also mentioned later on that sure, some complaints might be legit, but most of them were just blown way out of proportion. This was a statement made by one of the officers investigating the issues. There have been no arrests. The bottom line is there is more than one team involved. There were a few reports that we felt were worth investigating, but a lot of the reports were malicious by attention-seeking people. Even with all the complaints from Elizabeth and other anxious parents, the police didn't really have the information to investigate particular people of interest. Ray Wire, the sexual crimes consultant with Operation Childcare, had his 2 cents about how these allegations played out. Pulling something like this is a seriously risky move. Plus, no babies actually got snatched, though some kids got checked out. What the heck was happening? There are way easier ways to get a hold of a baby. After poking around claims all over South Yorkshire and beyond for years, they wrapped up Operation Childcare in 1994. The cops rounded up over 250 reports of fake or bogus social workers, but they figured only 18 were worth a second look, and only 2 of them were actually legit. But even with Operation Childcare throwing in the towel without any arrests, worried parents in the UK weren't letting up on the claims. Anne Wiley, another young mother, had a story similar to Elizabeth's. This time, it went down over 200 miles away in the Scottish town of Hamilton. Back in October 1994, a stranger showed up at Anne's door wanting to examine her toddler. Anne later told police, "It struck me as odd right from the get-go because no one usually comes to my back door." This lady claimed she was my new health visitor and came to review his medical records. He had asthma. I asked her, "You got any ID?" and she said, "Oh, I must have left it in the car," which my regular health visitor never does. I peeked at the car and there was a guy in there smoking, which was weird because you wouldn't expect health visitors to do that. So I asked her my son's name and she hesitated. But then she whipped out this file, and I don't know if it was my son's, but she seemed to know all his medical history, how long he'd been in the hospital and such. She chatted with my son, but it was pouring rain. So I said we'd all better head inside. I took my son in and she was gone. Anne described this woman as being in her 20s, around 5'4", with a slim build, light brown hair, and a small mark under her right eye. Another encounter involved 35-year-old mother Lenise Stewart from Edinburgh in April 1995. According to Stewart, a woman tried to snatch her 4-month-old baby. The intruder was a fake health visitor there to check on her baby. Lenise said the smartly dressed lady grabbed hold of her infant daughter and tried to make a run for it. Stewart had to put up a fight, claiming she threw a punch to get her baby back. The whole incident got reported to the cops and was initially tied to other attempted abductions in the area. However, the police later backed off this claim, saying there were sightings of a sketchy woman around but no actual kidnapping attempts. Neighbors stayed on high alert in the days and weeks that followed, but stayed skeptical about Stewart's story. Just a few days later, a spokesperson from Lothian and Borders Police said the following: "We're not on the lookout for anyone related to the incident. Case closed." There were some people who accused Stewart of making up this story as a way to grab attention, but Stewart obviously wasn't having it. She had to put up a public fight against these rumors. She said, "As far as I'm concerned, I'm sticking by my story. No hoax. It all went down just like I said. I'm not going to be hit with wasting police time. I've heard whispers about it. The investigation's done, and if you want more info, go ask the police." There was a moment when the cops seemed to be toying with the idea of slapping charges on Stewart for filing a false police report, but that eventually just fizzled out. Same goes for any of her own stories about a weirdo trying to snatch her kid. Many people think that the whole thing never actually happened, but that didn't stop it from being another headline-grabbing incident in the UK. There are dozens of additional incidents that are similar to the ones we just went over, but none have resulted in an arrest that has tied to any sort of underground organization or anything like that.